The elevator doors slid open, and I stepped out onto the 32nd floor, my heart racing with anticipation. This was it, the moment I'd been working towards for years. As I strode down the hallway, the click of my heels echoed against the polished marble floors. I paused for a moment, smoothing down my blazer and taking a deep breath before pushing open the heavy oak door to the boardroom. "Leela, come in," Mr. Jameson, the CEO, greeted me with a warm smile. "We've been eagerly awaiting your arrival." I scanned the room, noting the familiar faces of the executive team seated around the long table. Their expressions were a mix of curiosity and expectation. "Thank you for having me," I said, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. Mr. Jameson gestured for me to take a seat. "As you all know, we've been discussing the future of our marketing division, and after careful consideration, I'm pleased to announce that Leela will be taking over as our new Chief Marketing Officer." A round of applause filled the room, and I felt a surge of pride wash over me. This was everything I'd ever dreamed of. "Congratulations, Leela," Sarah, the HR director, said warmly. "You've certainly earned it." I spent the next hour outlining my vision for the department, fielding questions, and accepting congratulations from my colleagues. By the time the meeting wrapped up, I was practically floating on air. As I gathered my things, Mr. Jameson approached me. "Leela, I have to say I'm impressed with your ideas. I have a feeling you're going to do great things for this company." "Thank you, sir," I replied, beaming. "I won't let you down." I practically skipped to my car, eager to share the news with Malcolm. As I drove home, I imagined his reaction, the pride in his eyes, the warm embrace, maybe even a celebratory dinner out. I pulled into our driveway and hurried inside, calling out, "Malcolm, are you home?" "In here," came his muffled reply from the living room. I found him sprawled on the couch, eyes glued to his phone. "Hey," I said, unable to contain my excitement. "Guess what happened today?" He glanced up briefly. "What's that?" "I got the promotion," I exclaimed, waiting for his reaction. Malcolm's eyes widened slightly, but his enthusiasm seemed forced. "Oh, that's great, honey. Congratulations." I frowned, my elation deflating like a punctured balloon. "That's it? I just became the youngest CMO in the company's history, and all you can say is that's great?" He sighed, setting down his phone. "Look, I'm happy for you, really. It's been a long day, and I'm tired." "Too tired to celebrate your wife's success?" I asked, hurt creeping into my voice. Malcolm stood up, running a hand through his hair. "Come on, Leela, don't make this a big deal. We can celebrate another time." I stared at him, feeling a sudden chill settle over me. This wasn't the reaction I'd expected at all. "Fine," I said, my voice tight. "I'm going to take a shower." As I climbed the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Malcolm had always been supportive of my career, hadn't he? But now, thinking back, I realized his enthusiasm had been waning for months. In the bathroom, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. Flushed cheeks, bright eyes, the picture of success. So why did I suddenly feel so unsettled? I stepped into the shower, letting the hot water wash over me as I tried to make sense of Malcolm's reaction. Was he jealous? Threatened by my success? Or was there something else going on that I hadn't noticed? As I dried off and slipped into my robe, I heard Malcolm's phone ping with a message. His muffled laughter drifted up the stairs, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. Who was he talking to that could make him laugh like that when he'd been too tired to celebrate with me? I shook my head, trying to dispel the negative thoughts. This was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. I wouldn't let Malcolm's odd behavior ruin it. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling while Malcolm snored softly beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. And I had no idea how to fix it. The alarm blared, jolting me awake. I reached over to silence it, my hand brushing against the cold, empty space where Malcolm should have been. Sighing, I dragged myself out of bed, the weight of my new responsibilities already pressing down on me. In the kitchen, I found a hastily scribbled note from Malcolm. "Early meeting. Don't wait up." I crumpled it in my fist, tossing it into the overflowing trash can. When was the last time he'd taken it out? As I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed with an urgent email from work. A major client was threatening to pull out of a deal. I'd have to go in early to salvage it. "So much for breakfast," I muttered, dumping my half-full mug in the sink. Hours later, I emerged from a tense meeting, exhausted but victorious. The client had agreed to stay on board, but only after I'd promised them the moon and stars. As I walked back to my office, my assistant, Jake, intercepted me. "Lila, your husband called. He said he'd be working late again tonight." I forced a smile. "Thanks, Jake. Can you clear my schedule for tomorrow morning? I need to prepare for the board presentation." Back in my office, I stared at the framed photo on my desk. Malcolm and me on our honeymoon, both of us sun-kissed and grinning. It felt like a lifetime ago. The day flew by in a blur of meetings and phone calls. By the time I got home, it was well past 9. The house was dark and silent. I flicked on the lights, revealing a mess of dirty dishes in the sink and Malcolm's clothes strewn across the living room floor. Anger bubbled up inside me. I stormed upstairs, ready to confront Malcolm, only to find our bedroom empty. His side of the closet was a disaster, suits and ties spilling out onto the floor. I sank onto the bed, my fury giving way to exhaustion. When had things gotten so bad between us? Just then my phone rang. It was my mother, Edna. "Lila, honey, how are you? We haven't heard from you in ages." I swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "I'm fine, Mom. Just busy with work." "And how's Malcolm? You two should come over for dinner soon. Your father's been asking about you." "Malcolm's..." "He's fine," I lied, my voice cracking. "Listen, Mom, I've got to go. I'll call you soon, okay?" I ended the call before she could respond, guilt gnawing at me. I hated lying to her, but I couldn't bear to admit how bad things had gotten. The front door slammed, and I heard Malcolm stumbling up the stairs. He appeared in the doorway, his tie askew and eyes bloodshot. "Where have you been?" I demanded, rising to my feet. He waved a dismissive hand. "Work, where else? Some of us don't have the luxury of coming home early." "Early?" I sputtered. "It's almost midnight, and what's that supposed to mean?" Malcolm's face darkened. "It means ever since your precious promotion, you've been slacking off at home. When's the last time you cooked a meal or did the laundry?" I recoiled as if he'd slapped me. "I've been working my ass off, Malcolm. I thought you'd be proud of me, not whatever this is." He laughed bitterly. "Proud? Of what? Watching my wife become a corporate robot? You're never here, Lila, and when you are, you're glued to your phone or laptop." "That's not fair," I protested, but a small voice in my head whispered that maybe he had a point. Malcolm shook his head, swaying slightly. "I'm going to bed. Some of us have to work in the morning." As he brushed past me, I caught a whiff of unfamiliar perfume. My stomach clenched. "Malcolm," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Is there someone else?" He froze, his back to me. For a moment, I thought he might confess. Instead, he said, "Don't be ridiculous," and stumbled into the bathroom, slamming the door behind him. I stood there, rooted to the spot as the sound of running water filled the silence. My mind raced, piecing together all the little oddities of the past few months, the late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the growing distance between us. As the reality of my situation crashed over me, I made a decision. Things couldn't go on like this. Something had to change, and soon. But first, I had a board presentation to nail. I'd deal with Malcolm later. Little did I know, later would come much sooner, and more painfully than I could have ever imagined. The boardroom was a blur of faces as I finished my presentation. My head throbbed and my stomach churned, but I forced a smile as applause filled the room. "Excellent work, Lila," Mr. Jameson beamed. "You've outdone yourself." I nodded, grateful for the praise, but desperate to escape. As the meeting adjourned, I made a beeline for the door, only to be intercepted by Sarah from HR. "Lila, are you all right? You look a bit pale." "I'm fine," I lied, waving off her concern. "Just need some air." I stumbled to the bathroom, barely making it to a stall before emptying the contents of my stomach. As I slumped against the cool tile wall, my phone buzzed. It was Malcolm. "Where are you?" His text read. "We need to talk." I ignored it, pushing myself up on shaky legs. The face in the mirror looked like a stranger, pale, drawn, with dark circles under her eyes. How had I let things get this bad? Back at my desk, I tried to focus on work, but the words on my screen swam before my eyes. The pain in my stomach intensified, and I broke out in a cold sweat. "Lila?" Jake's voice seemed to come from far away. "Lila, are you okay?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. The room tilted sideways, and then everything went black. I woke to the steady beep of a heart monitor and the antiseptic smell of a hospital room. A nurse hovered nearby, adjusting my IV. "What happened?" I croaked. "You collapsed at work, dear," she said gently. "Stress-induced gastritis. You need to take better care of yourself." I closed my eyes, shame washing over me. How had I let my life spiral so out of control? Hours passed in a haze of tests and doctor's visits. As evening fell, I heard a commotion in the hallway. "I'm her husband. You can't keep me out." Malcolm burst into the room, his face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Lila, baby, are you okay? Why didn't you call me?" I turned away, unable to bear his false sympathy. "I'm fine, Malcolm, you can go." He sat on the edge of the bed, taking my hand. "Don't be like that. I was worried sick when your office called." I snatched my hand away. "Were you, or were you too busy with your late meetings to notice I was gone?" Malcolm's face hardened. "Is that what this is about? You working yourself into the hospital to prove a point?" "Get out," I hissed, tears stinging my eyes. "Just get out!" He stood, shaking his head. "You need help, Lila. This job is destroying you." As he left, I caught a glimpse of a young woman waiting in the hallway. She looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place her. My parents arrived shortly after, faces etched with worry. "Oh, honey," Mom said, enveloping me in a gentle hug. "Why didn't you tell us things were so bad?" Dad squeezed my hand. "We're here now, sweetheart, whatever you need." I broke down then, sobbing into my mother's shoulder as months of pent-up stress and pain poured out of me. I think Malcolm's cheating on me," I choked out between sobs. Mom and Dad exchanged a look I couldn't decipher. "We've been worried about you two for a while," Dad said softly. "But let's not jump to conclusions. Focus on getting better first, okay?" I nodded, too exhausted to argue. As my parents settled into the chairs beside my bed, I drifted off into a fitful sleep. A noise woke me sometime later, hushed voices in the hallway. I opened my eyes to see Malcolm through the partially open door, his arm around the young woman I'd seen earlier. As I watched, he leaned down and kissed her, right there in the hospital corridor. My heart shattered into a million pieces, and a strangled sob escaped my lips. Malcolm's head snapped up, his eyes meeting mine through the gap in the door. For a moment, we stared at each other, the truth hanging between us like a guillotine blade. Then he was gone, taking the last shreds of my marriage with him. As dawn broke, I made a vow to myself. I would get better, stronger, and then I would make Malcolm pay for every lie, every betrayal. This was war, and I intended to win. The hospital room felt suffocating as I stared at the ceiling, replaying the scene I'd witnessed last night. Malcolm's betrayal burned in my chest, a constant, searing pain that threatened to consume me. I was so lost in my thoughts that I barely noticed the nurse enter. "Mrs. Thompson, your husband is here to see you." I flinched at the word husband, but nodded, steeling myself for the confrontation. Malcolm walked in, his face a mask of concern that I now recognized as completely fake. "Lila, how are you feeling?" he asked, reaching for my hand. I pulled away, my voice cold. "Cut the act, Malcolm. I saw you last night with her." His face paled, then hardened. "I don't know what you think you saw, but—" "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't you dare lie to me anymore." Malcolm sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I've been seeing someone else. Her name is Stella, and she understands me in a way you haven't for a long time." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd suspected, of course, but hearing him admit it so callously shattered something inside me. "How long?" I whispered. "Does it matter?" he countered. "It matters to me," I shouted, ignoring the pain in my stomach as I sat up. "How long have you been lying to my face?" Malcolm had the decency to look ashamed. 6 months, he admitted quietly. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of betrayal. I felt sick all over again. "I think it's best if we end this now," Malcolm said, reaching into his briefcase. "I've had these drawn up for a while." He placed a stack of papers on my bedside table. Even in my emotional state, I recognized them immediately. Divorce papers. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You bring divorce papers to the hospital?" Malcolm shrugged. "I thought it would be easier this way. Clean break and all that." I laughed bitterly. "Easier for who, Malcolm? For you? So you can run off with your little mistress without feeling guilty?" "Don't be dramatic, Lila," he said, his tone condescending. "We both know this marriage has been over for a long time. Your career has always come first." "My career?" I sputtered. "You're blaming this on my success?" Face it, Lila, Malcolm said, his voice cold. You've changed. The woman I married wouldn't have worked herself into the hospital. She would have made time for her husband. I stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time. This man who I'd loved and supported for years was a stranger to me now. Get out, I said quietly. Lila, be reasonable. Get out! I screamed, grabbing the water pitcher from my bedside table and hurling it at him. It missed, shattering against the wall. Malcolm backed away, hands raised. I'll have my lawyer contact you, he said, before turning and walking out of my life. I collapsed back onto the bed, sobs racking my body. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? A commotion in the hallway caught my attention. Wiping my eyes, I dragged myself out of bed and to the window. In the parking lot below, I saw Malcolm and the young woman Stella in a heated argument. As I watched, she slapped him hard across the face before storming off to her car. A spark of vindictive pleasure cut through my pain. At least I wasn't the only one suffering. As I turned away from the window, my eyes fell on the divorce papers Malcolm had left. Anger surged through me, replacing the hurt and despair. He wanted a clean break? Fine, but it would be on my terms, not his. I reached for my phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed a number I never thought I'd need. Hello? A gruff voice answered. Mr. Donovan? This is Lila Thompson. I need to hire a private investigator. As I hung up, a sense of grim determination settled over me. Malcolm thought he could discard me so easily? He was about to learn just how wrong he was. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of my fight back. The familiar creak of my childhood home's front door felt like a bittersweet embrace as I stepped inside, suitcase in hand. Mom and Dad hovered nearby, their faces etched with concern. Honey, are you sure you don't want us to go back to the house with you? Mom asked, wringing her hands. I shook my head, forcing a smile. No, I can handle it. I just need to grab some clothes and my work laptop. Dad squeezed my shoulder. We're here if you need anything, sweetheart. As I climbed the stairs to my old bedroom, a wave of exhaustion washed over me. The past week had been a blur of hospital discharge papers, hushed phone calls with Mr. Donovan, and avoiding Malcolm's incessant texts. I collapsed onto the twin bed, staring at the faded posters on the walls. How had I gone from a successful CMO to hiding in my parents' house like a teenager? My phone buzzed, Malcolm's name flashing on the screen. I ignored it, opening my email instead. There was a message from Mr. Donovan. Mrs. Thompson, I have some preliminary information. Can we meet tomorrow? My heart raced as I typed a quick reply, confirming a meeting time. This was it, the first step towards reclaiming my life. The next morning, I sat across from Mr. Donovan in a dingy coffee shop, my hands wrapped around a lukewarm latte. Mrs. Thompson, he began, sliding a manila envelope across the table. I think you'll find this interesting. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside were photos of Malcolm and Stella, entering hotels, sharing intimate dinners, even kissing in Malcolm's car outside our house. There's more, Mr. Donovan said, his voice grave. We've uncovered some financial irregularities in your joint accounts. It appears Mr. Thompson has been funneling money into a separate account for months. The room spun as the implications sank in. Not only had Malcolm betrayed me emotionally, but he'd been planning this for a long time. What do I do now? I whispered, feeling lost. Mr. Donovan leaned forward. You fight, Mrs. Thompson. You take this evidence to a good divorce lawyer and you fight for everything you're entitled to. I nodded, a spark of determination igniting in my chest. Thank you, Mr. Donovan. I'll be in touch. Back at my parents' house, I locked myself in my room, spreading the evidence across my bed. Each photo, each bank statement felt like a dagger to my heart. But with each piece I examined, my resolve strengthened. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Leela? Mom called. There's someone here to see you. Confused, I opened the door and froze. Standing in the hallway was Stella, Malcolm's mistress. What are you doing here? I hissed, instinctively blocking the doorway. Stella's eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup smudged. I need to talk to you about Malcolm. Against my better judgment, I let her in. Stella perched on the edge of my bed, her eyes widening as she took in the scattered evidence. Oh, God, she whispered. You know? What do you want, Stella? I asked, my voice cold. She took a deep breath. I'm pregnant. And Malcolm, he wants me to get rid of it. He says he can't afford the scandal, not with the merger coming up. The room tilted sideways as her words sank in. Malcolm, the man I'd loved for years, was capable of this level of cruelty? Why are you telling me this? I managed to ask. Stella's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of fear and determination. Because I'm keeping this baby, and I think we can help each other. In that moment, staring at the woman who'd helped destroy my marriage, I made a decision that would change everything. Tell me everything, I said, sitting down beside her. As Stella began to speak, I felt a shift inside me. The hurt and betrayal were still there, but something else was taking root. A fierce determination to not just survive this, but to come out stronger. Malcolm had no idea what was coming for him, and I was just getting started. My heart pounded as I stood outside the sleek office building, clutching a thick manila envelope. Inside was every shred of evidence I'd gathered over the past weeks: bank statements, photos, and Stella's sworn affidavit. Today was the day I'd confront Malcolm and end this charade once and for all. I took a deep breath and pushed through the revolving door. The receptionist's eyes widened in recognition. "Mrs. Thompson, we weren't expecting you." "It's fine," I cut her off, striding towards Malcolm's office. "He'll see me." I burst into the room without knocking. Malcolm looked up from his desk, surprise quickly morphing into annoyance. "Lila, what are you doing here? I told you, our lawyers will handle." "Shut up, Malcolm," I snapped, slapping the envelope onto his desk. "Open it." His brow furrowed as he leafed through the contents. I watched his face pale, then flush with anger. "Where did you get these?" he hissed. "Does it matter? It's all true, isn't it?" Malcolm stood abruptly, looming over me. "You had me followed, you little—" "Don't you dare," I interrupted, standing my ground. "You don't get to be angry, not after what you've done." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing like a caged animal. "What do you want, Lila? Money? Is that it?" I laughed bitterly. "I want a divorce, Malcolm, on my terms. And if I refuse—" I pulled out my phone, showing him an email draft. "Then these photos go to the board. I wonder how they'll feel about their golden boy embezzling company funds to finance his affair?" Malcolm's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, grabbing my wrist. "You wouldn't dare." "Let go of me," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Is everything okay in here?" We both turned to see Stella standing in the doorway, her hand protectively over her slightly swollen belly. Malcolm's grip loosened in shock. "Stella? What are you?" "I asked her to come," I said, wrenching my arm free. She had quite a story to tell. Stella stepped into the room, her eyes locked on Malcolm. "I'm done lying for you, Malcolm. I told Lila everything." Malcolm's face drained of color. "You stupid bitch." He snarled. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I stepped between them, fury coursing through my veins. "Don't you dare speak to her like that. It's over, Malcolm. You've lost." He lunged at me again, but this time I was ready. I sidestepped, and he stumbled, crashing into his desk. The sound of shattering glass filled the air as his awards and photos went flying. Security burst into the room, alerted by the commotion. "Is everything all right, Mr. Thompson?" Malcolm straightened, adjusting his tie. His eyes burned with hatred as he looked at me. "Everything's fine. Mrs. Thompson was just leaving." I turned to the security guards. "Actually, I'd like to file a report. Mr. Thompson just assaulted me." Malcolm's face paled. "You're lying." "Am I?" I held up my wrist, already bruising from his grip. "I'm sure the security cameras will back me up." As the guards led Malcolm away, protesting loudly, I felt a strange mix of triumph and exhaustion wash over me. It was done. I'd won. Stella touched my arm gently. "Are you okay?" I nodded, suddenly feeling lightheaded. "I think I need to sit down." As I sank into Malcolm's plush office chair, the reality of what had just happened hit me like a tidal wave. My marriage was over. My life as I knew it was over. "What do I do now?" I whispered, more to myself than to Stella. She squeezed my shoulder. "You live, Lila. You've won your freedom. Now you get to decide what to do with it." As I sat there, surrounded by the wreckage of Malcolm's office and my former life, I realized Stella was right. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. And for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope for the future. But as I looked at the chaos around me, I knew the hardest part was yet to come. The battle was won, but the war? That was just beginning. The courtroom felt suffocating as I sat across from Malcolm, his eyes burning with a mixture of anger and desperation. Our lawyers flanked us, whispering last-minute advice. I gripped the armrests of my chair, steeling myself for what was to come. "All rise," the bailiff called out as the judge entered. As the proceedings began, I found myself drifting, remembering the events that led us here. The late nights, the lies, the betrayal. The moment I saw Malcolm with Stella in the hospital parking lot, the confrontation in his office, it all seemed like a lifetime ago. My lawyer's voice snapped me back to reality. Your Honor, we have irrefutable evidence of Mr. Thompson's infidelity and financial misconduct. Malcolm's lawyer jumped in, his voice dripping with condescension. Your Honor, my client admits to a momentary lapse in judgment, but Mrs. Thompson's claims of embezzlement are purely speculative. I felt my blood boil. Momentary lapse? Before I could stop myself, I stood up. That's a lie. The judge's gavel came down hard. Mrs. Thompson, control yourself or I'll hold you in contempt. I sank back into my seat, trembling with rage. My lawyer squeezed my arm reassuringly before continuing his argument. As the evidence was presented, bank statements, photos, Stella's affidavit, I watched Malcolm's face. His cool facade crumbled, replaced by a look of panic. During a recess, Malcolm cornered me in the hallway. Lila, please, he begged, his voice low. We can work this out. Think about our life together, everything we've built. I looked into the eyes of the man I once loved, searching for any trace of the person I married. All I saw was a stranger. It's too late, Malcolm. You made your choice. Don't do this, he hissed, grabbing my arm. I'll ruin you. I'll make sure you never work in this town again. Before I could respond, a voice cut through the tension. Is there a problem here? We turned to see Stella, her pregnancy now clearly visible. Malcolm's face contorted with rage. You, he snarled. This is all your fault, you little... That's enough, I interrupted, wrenching my arm free. It's over, Malcolm. Accept it. As we filed back into the courtroom, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Whatever happened next, I knew I'd made the right decision. The judge cleared his throat. Having reviewed the evidence, I'm prepared to make my ruling. Time seemed to slow as he spoke, detailing the division of assets, alimony, and the consequences of Malcolm's financial misconduct. With each word, I felt the weight of my old life falling away. Furthermore, the judge continued, given the evidence of Mr. Thompson's embezzlement, I'm recommending a full investigation by the district attorney's office. Malcolm leapt to his feet. You can't do this. I'll appeal. Mr. Thompson, sit down or I'll have you removed, the judge warned. As Malcolm slumped in his seat, defeated, I caught Stella's eye across the courtroom. She nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of our unlikely alliance. Mrs. Thompson, the judge addressed me directly, do you have anything you'd like to say before we conclude? I stood, my legs shaky but my voice strong. Your Honor, I came here today not for revenge, but for justice. For myself, for Stella, and for every person Malcolm has hurt with his lies and manipulation. All I want now is to move forward with my life. The judge nodded. Very well. This court grants the divorce on the grounds of adultery and financial misconduct. Mr. Thompson, you are hereby ordered to sign the divorce papers. With trembling hands, Malcolm scrawled his signature on the documents. As he did, I felt a surge of emotions, relief, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of freedom. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by flashing cameras and shouted questions from reporters, I took a deep breath of fresh air. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. As I walked down the steps, head held high, I knew this wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of my new life, and I was ready to face whatever came next. The weight of the certified letter felt heavy in my hands as I stood before the mailbox outside Malcolm's office building. This was it, the final act in our twisted drama. With a deep breath, I slipped the envelope into the slot, hearing it thud against the metal bottom. There was no turning back now. As I walked away, my phone buzzed. It was Stella. It's done, I told her. Are you sure about this? Absolutely, she replied, her voice firm. It's time everyone knew the truth. Over the next few days, I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the anticipation building inside me. Then, on a crisp Friday morning, all hell broke loose. My phone exploded with notifications, missed calls, texts, emails. I opened one from my old colleague, Jake. Holy shit, Lila. Have you seen the news? I clicked the link he sent, my heart racing. There it was, splashed across the company's internal newsletter. Executive caught in scandal, affair and embezzlement exposed. The article detailed Malcolm's indiscretions, citing an anonymous source, Stella, and irrefutable evidence, my letter. As I read, a mix of emotions washed over me: vindication, sadness, and finally, a profound sense of relief. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was Malcolm. "You vindictive bitch," he snarled. "You've ruined everything." I laughed, surprising myself with how hollow it sounded. "No, Malcolm, you did that all on your own. I've been transferred," he spat, "to the Siberia of corporate offices. And Stella, she resigned this morning. Are you happy now?" I paused, considering. "You know what? I am. Not because you're suffering, but because the truth is finally out. Goodbye, Malcolm." I hung up, feeling lighter than I had in months. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I threw myself into my work, relishing the challenges that came with my new position. In the evenings, I spent time with my parents, rediscovering the joy of family dinners and long conversations. One sunny Saturday, Mom and Dad suggested a picnic in the park. As we sat on a checkered blanket, surrounded by the sounds of children playing and dogs barking, Dad turned to me. "Lila, honey," he said, his eyes twinkling, "your mother and I are so proud of you. You've been through hell, but you've come out stronger." Mom squeezed my hand. "We were worried about you for a while there, but look at you now, successful, independent, and happier than we've seen you in years." Tears pricked my eyes. "Thanks, Mom, Dad. I couldn't have done it without you." As we packed up our picnic, a handsome stranger jogged by, flashing me a smile. For a moment, I felt a flutter in my chest, a feeling I thought I'd never experience again. But as quickly as it came, it passed. I realized I didn't need a man to feel complete. For the first time in my adult life, I was truly happy being single. That night, as I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, looking out over the city lights, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the betrayal, the fight for justice, it had all led to this moment. I thought about Malcolm, about Stella and the baby she was carrying. I hoped they'd find peace, even as I reveled in my own. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. "Big presentation tomorrow. You ready to knock their socks off?" I smiled, typing back a quick, "You bet." As I turned in for the night, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was different from the one who had discovered her husband's betrayal all those months ago. She was stronger, wiser, and unafraid to face whatever challenges lay ahead. I climbed into bed, feeling a sense of contentment wash over me. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, I couldn't wait to see what it would bring. As I drifted off to sleep, one thought echoed in my mind. I had survived. I had triumphed, and the best was yet to come.